I stepped into the house, tired from my afternoon out, expecting the usual quiet hum of home, the familiar scent of my old leather armchair mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. But today, something felt off. As soon as I entered through the front door, I froze. The weight of the silence was replaced by an odd clutter, an unfamiliar chaos that sent a chill up my spine. The living room, once my peaceful haven, was suddenly alive with movement, filled with travel bags, jackets tossed carelessly across the couch, and laughter that didn't belong. And then I saw them. Heather's parents, her father, a man with salt and pepper hair that looked like it had been bleached by too many summers under the sun, was sprawled out in my favorite wicker chair, the one my late husband had sat in for hours, telling stories of his childhood, his dreams, his life. The chair now looked incongruous, as though it didn't belong, like a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit. And there she was, Heather, standing in the doorway of the master bedroom, smiling in that way she always did when she was trying too hard to make a situation seem normal. Too normal, too rehearsed. "Oh, Mom, you're home," she chirped, her voice high-pitched in a way that almost sounded practiced, like she was trying to convince herself of something. "We just thought it would be better for them, for their health." She gestured to her parents in the living room, as though her words were supposed to make everything okay. "The light's better in here, babe," she continued, her smile stretched a little too wide. "It's just for a while, you understand, right?" I didn't respond immediately, my body frozen to the spot. As I tried to make sense of what was happening, there was something suffocating about the way the room felt now, like the air had been sucked out of it, leaving only tension in its place. The master bedroom, the space that had always been my sanctuary, was now unrecognizable. Heather's parents had taken over every inch. Her mother's flowery suitcase was plopped next to my husband's old dresser, the one I'd never been able to bring myself to sell after he passed. The room felt as though it had been rearranged, not just physically, but emotionally. My things shoved into corners, out of sight, out of mind. The bed that used to be ours, a place of rest, had been remade with garish new linens, completely different from the ones my husband and I had chosen together. And that chair, my chair, the one I had carefully placed by the window, the place where I could escape for just a moment, was shoved unceremoniously into the corner of the room, nearly tipping over. I felt a sudden pressure in my chest, like something was slowly closing in on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. "Isn't it wonderful?" Heather beamed, unaware of the devastation written all over my face. She seemed so pleased with herself. She was smiling like she had done something kind, something generous. But I could see the cracks in her facade, the hollow look in her eyes when she glanced briefly at me, as if she knew there was a storm brewing just below the surface. "We thought it would be better for them, with their joints and everything." I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the words she didn't say, but that I could hear loud and clear. This isn't about their health, is it? The unspoken truth was clear. Heather had moved her parents in not because they needed a better environment, but because she wanted control. Control of this house, control of my life, control of everything that had once been mine. And then it hit me. I wasn't just physically displaced. No, this wasn't just about a bedroom. It was about something deeper, something far more painful. I was being pushed out of my own life, my years of sacrifice, my quiet acceptance, my love for my son and his family. It all seemed to mean nothing now. All of that work, that care had crumbled into nothing. I'd given them everything, and now everything was slipping away. I looked around the room, seeing nothing but reminders of my past, my history, scattered and shoved out of view. I tried to hold my emotions in check, but it was hard. Anger, frustration, betrayal, all swirled inside me, a storm I couldn't silence. I could feel my hands shake, the bitterness rising in my throat, but I held it in. No screaming, no outbursts. I had learned long ago that these things only made it worse. I could already hear Daniel's voice in my mind. "Mom, you're just overreacting." He'd always been a passive one, the one who deferred to Heather, the one who stayed silent, the one who never had the strength to stand up for what was right. "Don't worry about it, Mom," Heather said, snapping me out of my thoughts. "We just thought it would be easier for all of us. You're welcome to stay in the guest room. It's got a nice view too. She motioned to the guest room where my things had been hastily thrown in a corner. The bed, once The bed, once neatly made with care, was now crumpled and unloved. There was no warmth in the room, no comfort. It was simply theirs. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle into me like a heavy stone. She hadn't asked, she hadn't consulted me, hadn't thought to make sure I was okay with this change. No, this was about her and her parents. She had decided without a second thought that I no longer mattered in this house. And that's when I realized something that hit me harder than anything before. They thought I was going to stay. They thought I would always stay, but I wouldn't. Not this time. Without saying a word, I walked slowly toward the guest room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to say anything to them. I didn't need to shout or cry. I wasn't going to let them see me broken, see me weak. I walked straight to my dresser, and without looking back, I grabbed a small suitcase. I didn't have much time, but I didn't need much, just enough to get out of here. I could already hear them in the living room, laughing, unaware of the storm that was about to break. To them, I was just sulking. They would assume I'd go to stay with my sister, Rosa, maybe for a few days, like I always did when I was feeling sorry for myself. They'd never know the truth. I was never coming back. Not this time. As I packed, I could feel something inside me shift. A realization was forming, slow but certain, said, I wasn't going to just accept this. I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own home. No, I wasn't just taking a trip to Rosa's. This was the end of something. The end of a life I'd been living for everyone else, and the beginning of something new, something that was mine. With a final glance at the house I had once shared with my late husband, the home I had built with love and care, I walked out the door. For good. But I wasn't running away, I was taking back control, and they would learn that I was not as invisible as they thought. The days after I left the house seemed to stretch on endlessly, like each hour dragged its feet, unwilling to let me move forward. I had settled into my small home in Oakland, a place that was mine, that felt like it had a breath of its own. Still, the memories of that house, the one I had shared with Daniel and Heather, lingered in my mind like an uncomfortable ache. I knew I couldn't move forward until I dealt with what had happened, until I understood how it had all unraveled so quickly. But the truth was, as the days passed, my anger didn't diminish, it only grew. Slowly, I realized the full extent of the emotional manipulation that had been going on for years. Heather wasn't some malicious villain as much as I wanted to paint her as one. No, she was something far subtler, something far harder to fight. She was passive aggressive. She played the part of the sweet daughter-in-law so well that it was easy to dismiss the small digs she'd make, the little things that chipped away at my confidence piece by piece. It started with the way she spoke about my cooking, as if everything I prepared wasn't quite good enough. It wasn't outright criticism at first. No, it was the kind of comment you could dismiss as a joke, if you wanted to believe that. This is a little too salty for my liking, don't you think? She'd say, nibbling on her food with a delicate grimace, as though she had been forced to eat something revolting. And I'd smile through it, of course, telling myself I was overreacting. Who was I to complain? She was family. But as the days went by, I began to notice the pattern. It wasn't just the cooking. She'd make little remarks about my appearance, too, remarks that seemed innocent enough until I realized how often they came. You really should get those glasses updated, Grace. They're so vintage. I mean, I guess they're kind of cute in an old-fashioned way. It wasn't a compliment. It was an attempt to make me feel outdated, out of touch with what was fashionable, with what was acceptable. It made me feel like I was invisible, like I wasn't even a part of their world anymore. And then, of course, there were the comments about my inability to keep up with everything. You know, Grace, I think it'd be great if you could help out more around here. I've been so busy with Lucas, and you haven't really done much lately, Heather would say, as though I hadn't been spending my days doing everything I could to keep their household running, making meals, looking after Lucas when she needed a break, paying bills from my retirement fund to help with expenses. I swallowed these comments, the guilt slowly seeping into my bones. I wanted to scream that I had already given so much of myself to this family, but what would be the point? What would I even say? Instead, I kept my mouth shut, watching as Heather skillfully continued to manipulate the situation to make me feel like I was the one at fault, the one who wasn't doing enough. Each comment, each subtle barb, made me question myself a little more. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of self-doubt, and yet I didn't know how to escape it. The worst part was I didn't know if I even had the right to be angry. I was her mother in law, after all. My place was to be supportive, to help out when I could. But why did it always feel like my contributions were being taken for granted? Why did it feel like I was just a filler in their lives, there to do the work they didn't want to but never truly valued? But the thing that hurt the most, the thing that really opened my eyes to the truth, was how Daniel responded. Or rather, how he didn't. My son, the one I had raised with love and patience, the one I had always thought would stand by me, had changed. Over the years, I'd seen how Heather's influence had worked its way into their marriage, but I had never expected him to completely lose himself in it. There were times when Heather made her passive aggressive remarks, or when I'd ask for something as simple as a little consideration, that I would look at Daniel, hoping for some sign that he'd stand up for me, that he'd recognize the strain, the hurt that I was silently bearing, but he never did. I'd watch him as he'd shrug it off, his eyes darting nervously to Heather, always choosing her side. Always. Even when he knew deep down that I was the one who needed his support. When I confronted him about it once, his response was a quiet, apologetic sigh. "Oh, you're just too sensitive. Heather didn't mean it like that. You know how she is. She's just trying to help." It was as if my feelings, my pain, didn't matter. Heather's needs, her wants, her little power plays, they were all that mattered. And with every silent moment, every time he chose her over me, the weight of abandonment grew heavier and heavier in my chest. Daniel wasn't just siding with Heather, he was choosing to ignore me, to disregard everything I had done for him, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had built with my own hands. And in doing so, he was slowly slipping away from me until he was just another part of Heather's world, a world where I didn't fit anymore. It wasn't until Heather casually mentioned, with that sickeningly sweet smile of hers, that her parents were moving in, that everything finally clicked into place. "Oh, Grace, I've been talking to my mom and dad about their house. It's fallen apart, freezing in the winter, and too humid in the summer. You know, their joints aren't what they used to be. I think they'll be much more comfortable here with us. It'll just be for a little while, okay?" The words landed in my stomach like a cold stone. The air seemed to disappear from the room as I processed what she had said. Just for a little while, and how many times had I heard that phrase before? How many times had Heather told me that something was temporary, only for it to drag on forever until I was suffocating under the weight of it? I wasn't stupid. I could see it now, clearer than ever before. This wasn't about helping her parents. It wasn't a family gesture, a kind act. No, this was about power. This was about Heather getting what she wanted: control of the house, control of Daniel, control of me. The more she took, the more she demanded, the less space I had to breathe. Her parents were just the next step in a long line of moves that had left me a stranger in my own home. And I felt it, deep in my bones. This time I couldn't stay silent anymore. This time I couldn't just sit back and let things happen. The next step was mine to take. I'd been out most of the afternoon attending a local community writing class I had recently joined. It had been one of the few things I had done for myself since moving to Oakland, a small escape into a world where my only concern was a blank page and the words that filled it. But as I made my way home, the peaceful sense of accomplishment that had carried me through the day slowly began to fade. My steps quickened as I neared the house, a deep, unsettled feeling creeping into my chest. Something was wrong. I couldn't place it, but I felt it, like an itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't scratch. When I opened the door, the overwhelming chaos of it all hit me like a tidal wave. The quiet, organized home I had so carefully crafted was gone. The entryway, once neat and simple, was now cluttered with travel bags, discarded coats, and shoes haphazardly tossed about. It looked like a storm had rolled through, but instead of the wind and rain, it was voices, laughter, chatter, unfamiliar voices, echoing throughout the house. My house. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to make sense of what I was seeing. The living room was packed with bags, and Heather's parents, her parents, had already settled in. They were lounging on my couch, acting as if they'd been there for years. The smell of their unfamiliar perfumes lingered in the air, sharp and jarring against the scents I had always known. Their voices blended with the sound of the TV playing quietly in the background, but none of it felt real. It felt like an invasion, like my entire life had been hijacked, and I wasn't even given the courtesy of a warning. "Oh, Mom, you're home." Heather's voice sliced through the noise like a blade. Her words were sweet, almost too sweet, as if she were trying to convince both me and herself that everything was fine. "My parents are here. Isn't this great? I've been telling you they were coming, remember?" She beamed at me with a smile so wide, so forced, that it almost looked painful. She was acting like I should feel honored, grateful for this disruption, for the intrusion. But inside, my heart sank. The smile on her face, the cheerful words, it all felt hollow. It was the same manipulation I had seen time and time again. She wanted me to accept this, to feel like this was a natural part of the family's flow, like I was supposed to be happy to share my home with strangers. And in that moment, I realized how much my feelings didn't matter. Not to Heather, not to anyone anymore. I tried to find my voice, but it got caught in my throat. The words I had rehearsed, the anger I had been carrying for so long, were suddenly too heavy to speak. So I said nothing. I just stood there in the doorway, taking it all in. The sight of them sprawled out in my space, laughing like they belonged, was too much. The furniture I had chosen, the arrangement I had lovingly crafted, now it was just theirs. It wasn't my home anymore, it hadn't been for a while, but now, the truth was undeniable. Heather didn't seem to notice my silence. She kept talking, the excitement in her voice almost sickening now. "Oh, Mom, I hope you don't mind, but we moved your things into the guest room. We had to make room for them, and, the guest room has a nice view. It'll be fine for now, right?" Her words hung in the air like thick fog. "It'll be fine." My heart dropped, the ache settling deep in my chest. The guest room. A room that was meant for exactly that. Guests, not for me, not for my things, not for my life. The guest room, once a space I had carefully organized for when family or friends visited, had now become my new home. It was as if I were a guest in my own life. The very idea of it, of me being pushed aside, relegated to the spare space as if I no longer mattered, struck me like a physical blow. I didn't scream, I didn't yell, I didn't even cry, though I wanted to. Instead, I just felt a deep, unshakable sadness settle over me. I looked around the room, seeing the little things that once belonged to me, now displaced. My late husband's favorite chair, the one I'd always placed near the window so I could watch the sunsets in peace, was now crammed against the wall in the guest room, shoved into a corner like it was an afterthought, and the symbolism wasn't lost on me. It wasn't just about the chair or the room or the house. It was about me, my life, my place in this family. I didn't belong here anymore. My thoughts spiraled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Heather was still smiling, talking, and I knew if I said anything now, it would just give her an excuse to dismiss my feelings, to brush me off. She'd tell me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic. She'd play the sweet daughter-in-law, and Daniel would stand by her, nodding along, apologizing with his eyes, but never with his actions. I could already feel it, the weight of the years of silence, of acquiescence, of giving and giving and giving until there was nothing left for me. I stood there, frozen, and that's when I realized the truth. I had been pushed to the edge. This wasn't just a house anymore. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was the culmination of everything that had been building up for years, the little comments, the disregard, the manipulation. And it was all coming to a head now. The decision I had been avoiding, the one I had feared more than anything, was now staring me in the face. I could feel it. Deep down, I knew there was no turning back. I was done. I couldn't stay here, not in this suffocating environment, not with these people who couldn't see me, who didn't even notice the way they were slowly chipping away at me. I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't need to justify myself. I wasn't just a visitor in their lives anymore. The decision was clear. I walked into the guest room, my feet heavy as I crossed the threshold. The room felt colder now, even though the sun was still shining outside. I stood in front of my dresser, the same dresser I had chosen for this house all those years ago. It wasn't just the furniture I was packing, it was everything I had once thought my life would be, everything that had been stolen from me in the quiet moments when no one was looking.
As I grabbed a small suitcase from the closet and began to pack, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't the chaotic rage I'd expected. No, this was quiet. This was final. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resigned to the truth. Heather would never see it. She would never understand. She would continue to manipulate, continue to take, continue to disregard anyone who stood in her way. But not me. Not anymore. I was leaving, and this time I wasn't coming back. The only question left was where I'd go from here. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with not knowing the answer. It was early morning when I woke, the kind of quiet that filled the room with its emptiness, a stillness that only made the weight of the decision I had been carrying feel heavier. My thoughts swirled like a storm, swirling faster and faster the more I tried to steady them. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had reached a point where the walls felt too tight around me, where the laughter, the voices of Heather's parents, the subtle dismissal from Daniel, were all just too much. My life had unraveled in front of me, piece by piece, and I could feel the thread that had once tied me to this place, to this family, slowly fraying. I had always been the pillar, the one who held everything together, but now, I was no longer sure what I was holding on to. I wasn't part of their world anymore, no matter how hard I tried to be. The space that had once been a sanctuary, a haven of peace and memories, had been swallowed whole. My house. The house I had spent years turning into a home. The house that once echoed with the laughter of my late husband and our shared dreams. But now, as I carefully sorted through the few belongings I thought I could take with me, the weight of it all began to settle deep in my chest. The dresser my husband had built with his own hands. His old leather-bound journal, the one he had written in almost every night before bed. I had to decide. Do I leave them behind, along with the years of memories tied to this place? Or do I take them with me, a reminder of what I had lost in the process of trying to be a good mother, a good mother-in-law, a good wife? The question hung in the air, suffocating me, but I didn't have an answer. Not yet. I ran my fingers over the edges of the journal, tracing the worn-out leather as though it still held some of his warmth. What was left for me here? It wasn't just the house that had been taken from me, it was everything that had once felt like mine. I could almost hear the sound of my own voice, asking myself how I had gotten here. How had I let myself be reduced to this? And then, as I slowly packed the few things I could carry, Heather's voice pierced through my thoughts. It was like a needle scraping against glass, cold and grating, but not harsh enough to shatter the silence. "You're really quiet today, Grace," she said, standing in the doorway, her tone sugar-coated but insincere. "Are you sure you're okay?" The question seemed innocent, even caring, but I could see the truth behind it. She wasn't concerned for me. No, she wanted to keep me in my place. To keep testing how much I would take. How much I would tolerate before I finally broke. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, the floodgates would open, and I wouldn't be able to stop myself. The years of frustration, the anger that had simmered beneath the surface, would pour out in a torrent I could no longer control. Instead, I silently packed my suitcase, the weight of each item growing heavier as I placed it inside. Each piece of clothing, each small item that had once been a part of my life here, now felt like an anchor. "Mom, are you sure you're not overreacting?" Daniel's voice came from behind me, low and dismissive. He hadn't been paying attention, hadn't noticed how everything had shifted. He had no idea what I was feeling, no idea how much I had given up for this family. "You'll come back soon, right?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. "This is all just a phase." I paused for a moment, the suitcase in my hand. His words stung more than anything Heather had said. Because they weren't just words, they were a reflection of everything he had failed to see. I wasn't coming back. This wasn't just a phase for me. This wasn't something I could just walk away from and forget. It was the moment I realized I didn't matter to him. It wasn't just Heather. It wasn't just her parents. It was Daniel, too. He had always been passive, yes, but now, in this moment, his failure to stand up for me, to see me, was the final betrayal. He had chosen her over me for so long that I no longer knew where I fit into his life. I wasn't just being dismissed, I was being erased. With a final, deliberate motion, I closed the suitcase. There was no turning back now. The weight of everything I had tried to be for them, the housekeeper, the caretaker, the emotional support, was now gone. And in its place, there was something else. Something stronger, something more enduring. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to be the one who fixed everything for them. I wasn't going to stay in this suffocating space, this place where I had become a shadow of myself. I walked out of the house, my footsteps heavy but purposeful. The car was waiting outside. I had planned for this, even though it had never felt real until now. I had packed a small bag, enough to get by. Enough to take with me into the unknown. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something I hadn't seen in a long time, myself. The drive to Oakland was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the car. The landscape outside the window blurred past in streaks of green and brown, but I couldn't focus on it. My mind was on the house I had just left behind. The family I had just left behind. But there was also something else, something faint but growing. A sense of freedom. A sense that, finally, I was in control of my life. As I arrived at the small house in Oakland, the one I had bought with my own savings years ago, I felt the weight of my decision shift. The quiet, familiar surroundings of the house welcomed me like an old friend. It was smaller than the home I had just left, but it was mine. I didn't need anyone's approval to be here. I didn't need to ask for permission to exist in this space. The air felt different here. The stillness wasn't oppressive, it was comforting. It was peaceful. It was a blank slate. The house seemed to sigh in relief as I stepped inside, the familiar smells of fresh paint and wood filling my senses. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls lightly as though reacquainting myself with a long-lost friend. I wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in years, I felt a stir of hope deep inside me. Maybe it had always been there, waiting, buried beneath all the years of sacrifice and self-doubt. But now, it was rising to the surface, and I knew that, somehow, I would find my way. This was my fresh start. And I would make it count. The quiet that filled the house in Oakland was unlike anything I had known in years. It wasn't the silence of abandonment or neglect, it was the kind of stillness that wraps around you like a warm blanket. The kind of silence that gives you space to breathe, to think, to be. I had arrived in this house with a suitcase, a handful of memories, and a heart full of uncertainty. But now, as the days passed, I began to realize that I had given myself the greatest gift of all, the chance to rediscover who I was. I was no longer just a mother, a grandmother, a wife to a man who was no longer with me. I wasn't anyone's caretaker or emotional crutch. I was Grace Monroe, and I had a chance to start fresh. The first morning I woke up in this house, the sunlight streamed through the small window above the kitchen sink. I stood there for a moment, just letting the warmth of the light bathe over me. I felt something stir inside, something that had been buried for so long. I had spent years thinking that my worth was measured by how much I could give to others. But in that moment, I realized that my worth had nothing to do with what I gave away. It was all about what I gave to myself. After breakfast, I spent the morning rearranging the small studio space I'd set up in the corner of the house. It wasn't much, just a small table, an easel, and a few supplies I had packed away when I left the old house. I hadn't painted in years. I had put my art aside when my life had become consumed by everyone else's needs. I had promised myself that I'd get back to it someday, but someday had always seemed so far away. Now, someday was here, staring me in the face. I pulled out my old sketchbook, the pages yellowed with age, and set it down in front of me. For a moment, I just stared at the blank page. It felt like a challenge, like the canvas was daring me to pick up the brush again. I dipped my brush into the paint, and the colors seemed to come alive under my touch. There was something soothing about it, the way the paint mixed, the way the brush moved across the page. I lost myself in it, completely absorbed by the act of creation. For the first time in years, I felt peace. It wasn't just about the painting. It was about rediscovering that part of me that had been silenced for so long. The part of me that had once felt so alive in the classroom, teaching young minds to see the world through an artist's eyes. The part of me that had created beauty for the sake of beauty, not for anyone else's approval, not for any reason other than the pure joy of it. And in that moment, I realized something important: I had forgotten how to live for myself. But now, with each brushstroke, I was slowly learning again. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, I settled into a new routine. I wasn't running on the treadmill of obligation anymore. I didn't have to be anywhere or do anything that I didn't want to. Instead, I spent my mornings painting, my afternoons walking through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, and my evenings reading or writing in my journal. It was a simple life, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the pressure of expectations weighing down on me. There was something freeing about it, about waking up and knowing that the day was mine to shape. I spent long hours in my small studio, experimenting with different styles, finding new ways to express myself on the canvas. My paintings began to reflect the emotions I had long kept hidden, the sadness, the anger, but also the hope. The colors I used spoke of things I had never said aloud. And slowly, as I painted, I began to heal. The house, too, was transforming. It became my sanctuary, a place that I didn't need to explain to anyone. It wasn't about pleasing anyone else anymore. It was about creating a space where I could simply exist. I arranged my belongings the way I wanted them. I found places for things that had been packed away for years, old books, trinkets, photographs that had once been tucked into boxes, forgotten. Now they were on display, little pieces of my life that didn't need to be explained to anyone. One afternoon, as I walked through the neighborhood, I decided to stop by the small community center just a few blocks away. I had noticed it many times but had never had the courage to walk in. Today, I was different. I walked in and found a group of people gathered for an art class. They welcomed me with smiles, no questions asked, no expectations. I joined in, and for the first time in a long time, I was surrounded by people who didn't see me as just someone's mother or someone's grandmother. They saw me for who I was, a fellow artist, someone with her own story to tell. Through the group, I met other women who had stories of their own, women who had built lives for themselves, who had overcome struggles and found strength in their independence. We shared our art, our ideas, our experiences. Slowly, I began to build connections again. These new friendships didn't feel like obligations. They didn't come with strings attached. They were genuine, simple, and pure. I was learning that I didn't have to rely on the people who had always been in my life to feel validated. I could make new connections, real connections, on my own terms. One evening, as I sat on my front porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something inside me shift. The house felt like home. I had made it my own, filled it with pieces of myself that I had long forgotten. The air was still, and the world around me was calm. I smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment spread through me. I had finally found something I had been searching for, peace. And it wasn't just the peace that came from my surroundings. It was the peace that came from within me. The peace of knowing that I was enough, just as I was. I didn't need anyone else to define me. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was Grace Monroe, and I was finally free to be the woman I had always wanted to be. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. And I knew, without a doubt, that I had found my place in the world, on my own terms. It's strange, the way things can spiral so quickly when you're not paying attention. I had left, but I didn't realize just how much my absence would rattle the foundation of their lives until it all began to unfold in front of me. In the beginning, I couldn't help but feel a small, guilty satisfaction in knowing that the dynamic in their house had shifted. I had been the glue that held everything together, even if it was in ways they never appreciated. But as time passed, I began to hear murmurs. The phone calls, the texts, the occasional voicemail. Daniel was reaching out, but not in the way I expected. At first, I thought it was just his usual tone, hesitant, passive. But soon, there was something else. Something more desperate. He had always been caught in the web Heather had woven, and for the first time, I saw it. He was starting to see it too. It wasn't that he didn't care about me. No, that was never the issue. But for years, he had deferred to Heather, siding with her, doing whatever kept the peace, doing whatever kept her from turning her attention on him. He never saw me for the woman I was just his mother, someone who could be counted on when things went wrong, someone who would quietly shoulder the burden without protest. But now, with Heather's manipulations exposed and the weight of the situation pressing down on him, Daniel was forced to reckon with the consequences of his passivity. It started with the financial strain. I wasn't there anymore to help with the bills. Without me contributing from my retirement fund, things quickly began to slip. Heather's parents were living there now, and they were expensive guests. With their medical bills, their needs, and the overall mess they made of the household, the burden started to grow. Daniel had always been a good provider, but there was a limit to what one person could handle, especially when there were too many people under one roof, all with their own needs and demands. Daniel's internal conflict grew by the day. He'd never expected Heather to become so demanding, to take so much without ever giving anything in return. He hadn't realized how much of his life had been molded by her until the pressure became too much to ignore. And then, one night, I received a phone call. It was from him. "Mom, I don't know what to do," he said, his voice raw, strained. "I've messed up. She's just making everything harder, and I didn't see it before. I didn't see what you were going through." I let the silence sit between us for a moment before responding. "You didn't see it, Daniel. And I'm not sure you ever will. But it's too late for apologies." I heard his breath catch. "Please, Grace. We can't keep going like this. I don't know how much longer I can handle this. I need your help. I need someone to fix this." My heart clenched, but there was a sense of peace that followed. I wasn't the one who could fix it anymore. I had been doing that my whole life, always stepping in, always cleaning up the mess, and I was done. This was his mess to untangle. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I'm not coming back. I can't. You need to deal with this. You need to stand up for yourself, for what's right. I'm not the one who can make it better for you anymore." And then, the silence on the other end. I knew he was grappling with the weight of my words, but I didn't flinch. He needed to see the consequences of his inaction. He needed to understand that I wasn't going to drop everything and fix everything anymore. As I hung up the phone, I felt an unexpected surge of relief. It wasn't that I didn't care about Daniel, it was that I finally understood the most important thing. I couldn't save him from the choices he'd made. Meanwhile, Heather's true nature began to reveal itself. It was as if her facade was slowly crumbling, like layers of a painted mask peeling away to show the ugliness underneath. At first, she had been the calm, sweet daughter-in-law, the one who smiled and made everything seem manageable. But now, in the absence of my steady presence, her cracks began to show. She grew angry at Daniel, accusing him of failing as a husband, as a provider. She lashed out at him for things that weren't his fault, blaming him for the financial strain and the growing tension in the house. Every conversation seemed to devolve into an argument, with Heather belittling Daniel at every turn. "You're not doing enough," she would say, her voice laced with venom. "You're failing. You couldn't even keep your mother from leaving. Do you understand how embarrassing this is? How this makes me look?" It was as though she no longer saw him as her partner, but as her personal servant, someone to blame for every little thing that went wrong. And with every sharp remark, every cruel jab, Daniel's confidence eroded further. He became quieter, more withdrawn, and the anger that had always smoldered in Heather's eyes flared hotter. I could feel it from a distance, even though I wasn't there. And then, Heather's parents, who had once seemed so harmless, began to show their own true colors. They weren't just frail old people in need of help. They were demanding, entitled, and difficult to please. They expected everything to be done for them, never offering anything in return. Their presence only made the already fragile household dynamics even more unbearable. The financial stress compounded everything. Without my help, Daniel was forced to make hard choices. The bills piled up, and the cracks in the foundation of their marriage began to show. Heather, unable to maintain her facade, turned her frustration on him, accusing him of not being able to provide, of being weak. The tension between them grew, and their once happy home became a battleground. I could almost hear it in the background of every conversation. The sound of a family falling apart. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The contrast between their lives and mine had never been more clear. My small home in Oakland, my quiet days filled with painting, walking, and reading, felt like an oasis compared to the chaos they were living in. I had reclaimed my peace, but they were drowning in their own mess. And when I received another message from Daniel, his voice almost pleading, I knew that things had reached a breaking point. Mom, I'm sorry. I just don't know what to do anymore. Please, if you can help. I don't want to lose everything. I stood by my decision. This wasn't my fight to fix. Not anymore. The man I had raised, the son I had always tried to protect, had to face the reality of his choices. He had to see that his passivity, his silence, had led him here. I didn't respond. It was time for him to see the consequences. The day had arrived. The day I had waited for, the day I had planned for. The day I would finally be free of the house that had once been my home, the place where I had given so much of myself and received so little in return. As the buyer pulled into the driveway, I could feel the weight of the moment settling over me. I wasn't the woman who had once walked through this door, unsure and uncertain of her place in the world. No, I was someone different now, a woman who had reclaimed her life, a woman who knew her worth, a woman who would no longer be silenced or pushed aside. I stood tall, watching as the buyer stepped out of his car. He was excited, eager to begin this new chapter of his life. I could see the excitement in his eyes as he shook my hand, already picturing what he would do with the house. It was his now, no one could take it away from him. But I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. As I turned to walk into the house, I heard the unmistakable sound of Heather's voice. Her footsteps came rapidly behind me, and her words were laced with desperation. "You can't do this, Grace," she shouted, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and fear. "You're making a mistake. This house, it's our family's history. You can't just walk away from it. You can't sell it." I didn't turn to face her. I didn't need to. I had heard it all before. Heather's words were designed to manipulate, to pull at my heartstrings, to make me feel guilty for making the choice I had already made. But I was done. Done with the guilt. Done with the manipulation. "You're right," I said, my voice calm, steady. "This house is a part of our history. But it's no longer part of mine. I'm not going to live in the past anymore, Heather." She moved in front of me, blocking my path. "You're going to regret this," she hissed, her eyes narrowing with fury. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can just walk away and leave us to pick up the pieces? You're abandoning your family. You're abandoning me." I took a deep breath, the sting of her words not as sharp as it once would have been. I had heard it all before, the accusations, the guilt, the blame. But this time I didn't let it break me. I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing peace. You don't get to manipulate me anymore, Heather." She took a step toward me, her hands trembling with rage, but I stood my ground. I had the law on my side. I had the paperwork in my hands, ready to be signed. I had no hesitation in my heart. "You have no right," Heather spat, her voice rising. "This house is mine too. You can't just take it away from me like this." She stepped back, her eyes wild. "I'll fight you for it. I'll take you to court. You won't get away with this." I took another step forward, closing the distance between us. The old Grace, the one who would have backed down, who would have given in to Heather's threats, was long gone. Now, there was only the woman who had found her voice, who had found her strength. "You can try," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "But it won't work. This house is mine to sell, and I'm done. I'm done with you, done with this toxic environment. I'm done letting you control my life." I turned back to the buyer, signaling for him to step inside. "It's done," I said quietly, feeling the weight of the words settle over me. "The house is yours." Heather stood there, frozen in place, her hands clenched at her sides, her face pale with fury. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes, she knew she had lost. And for the first time I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Not for leaving, not for walking away from the family I had spent so many years trying to hold together. This was my victory. This was my stand. I left the old house behind, one last time, a sense of finality filling me. It wasn't just the house I was leaving, it was everything that had held me back, everything that had tried to silence me. It was my past. And I was ready to walk into the future. As I drove away, I felt a mixture of emotions: sadness, relief, and pride. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. The buyer called later that day, letting me know the paperwork was all finalized. The house was officially sold. As I sat down at my desk that evening, I found a letter waiting for me in the mailbox. It was from Lucas, my grandson. Dear Grandma Grace, I don't know where to start. I've been thinking a lot about you, and I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. You're the real family hero. You always put everyone else first, but now you're taking care of yourself. I think that's the bravest thing I've ever seen. I love you so much. Love, Lucas. I held the letter in my hands, the words like a balm to my soul. For so long, I had thought that my value was in what I did for others, in how much I could give. But now, in Lucas's words, I realized something I had never fully understood: I was the hero of my own story. The peaceful ending to this chapter of my life was more than just leaving behind the house, the drama, the heartbreak. It was about finally choosing to live for myself, to no longer define myself by the roles others had placed on me. The peace I had fought for, the peace I had claimed, was mine to keep. I spent my days now painting, walking through the quiet streets of my new neighborhood, and enjoying the simple, quiet moments that I had always longed for. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I didn't need to prove anything. I had found my place in the world, and it wasn't tied to a house or to anyone's expectations of me. It was tied to me. And for the first time in years, I felt whole.